Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubbs at the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, fresh off of crying that the NHL is rigged. The Chicago Blackhawks won the NHL lottery, and the Ducks fell to second, so I don't get to dream of Connor Bedard anymore. Anyways, I'm filibustering. Brian Marceau is here with us, as always. Brian, how you doing? How you doing?
I'm doing well. I was a little bit concerned that the hockey talk was going to extend, which always makes me get some PTSD that hockey talk is going to turn into soccer talk, and I'm going to have to grab my phone. But it concluded. Dallas is having some connection issues, I believe.
You can still hear me. My camera just thinks it disconnected, probably because I'm such an ugly piece of shit. So we're just going to go without my video, and I will just fiddle with it in the background. And go Kraken. Andrew, you're dead to me. That is mean. I am in mourning right now. You have things to celebrate. I don't. Congrats, by the way, on the whole playoff series victory and all that. I could talk hockey forever, but that's not what we're here to do, Brian. We're going to jump right into it. Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. Today, we are way too early picking the Big Sky Conference from worst to best. Also, Jason, you're dead to me as well. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, go to the YouTube video. I just put Jason Mayer's comment up on the screen, and that is the last time Jason will ever have a comment shown on Tubbs at the Club. Brian, I would like you to start this off.
Okay, well, Around the Bar brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. By the way, man, our comment section just kicking ass. KP Marshall, fiddle with it in the background. That's more or less my life philosophy for the last, I don't know, I turned 13 a while ago. So since then, yeah, fiddle with the background. Yeah, we know what we're talking about. So the way we're gonna batch this, because we're not gonna talk about the uninteresting teams for a gigantic amount of time. We're going to just break the Big Sky into tiers and essentially rank the tiers. And I'm going to lead us off starting from the bottom. And this is a tier I'm going to call teams that can't beat Idaho. So the bottom four teams that I'm going through this is also based off of kind of spring news we've gotten out of teams, is going at number 12. So bottom of the Big Sky, Idaho State, number 12 for me. Number 11, top 5 Portland State. Yeah, heresy, but top 5 Portland State. They're number 11. Number 10, Northern Arizona. And number 9, Cal Poly. Dallas, you're gonna be back on here in a second. Of those 4 teams, those bottom 4 teams, Idaho State, Portland State, NAU, Cal Poly, which is the most intriguing to you in the can't beat Idaho level?
Boy, well, it's not Idaho State. I can tell you that. Nobody cares about them. They're not going to succeed until all of their old boys club is dead and in the ground. So don't care about them. Portland State is basically in the same spot. I mean, their coach thought about leaving for Idaho State. So that's no. NAU is meh. So I'm going to have to go with Cal Poly, which is weird because as anybody that's listened to this show for any amount of time knows, Brian and I are 1A and 1B in the Bo Baldwin fan club, and he has now left Cal Poly, followed Charlie Ragel over to Arizona State. So Paul Wolf, former Eastern coach, now taking the reins at Cal Poly. Brian, I think Cal Poly is the most interesting to me only because they have lost the least amount of players in that group of the 4 teams that we don't expect to have a snowball's chance in hell against Idaho. They lost receiver Chris Coleman. He was the top receiver last year. He's in camp with the Miami Dolphins. They also lost a tight end that was 3rd or 4th in the team in receptions. And that was really about it. They bring back almost that entire team because, again, Baldwin purged a lot of that roster and was playing a lot of really young guys. So you combo the fact that they've got a bunch of guys returning. Most of their coaching staff is intact. Again, Paul Wolf was there on staff as the assistant head coach / I think offensive line coach. He's promoted up to HC. Just about every other coach there stayed. And then they brought in Sam Heward, the massive 5-star recruit that went to UW as part of the family tradition, couldn't see the field there, and is now at Cal Poly. So to me, that's the one team in this group that could finally make that leap. We were talking about it for a long time. Is Bo Baldwin going to get this team to take a step up? It's not Bo Baldwin anymore, but Paul Wolf was a pretty damn good coach in the Big Sky. Again, we're talking all the same base that they have been trying to build off of, same coaching staff. If Sam Heward's the guy, great. If not, I mean, who knows? But to me, that is the only team in this 4 that is truly interesting to me. Those other 3 schools are just going to be in for another mediocre years, probably looking at firing their coaches, or maybe Cody Hawkins grows a brain and leaves Idaho State after a year like Charlie Rackle did.
I don't have any disagreement with you about the interesting team, because Idaho State, they're too far away in my mind for a rebuild. They're not Idaho last year. Idaho State, they just didn't have enough talent last season. And we saw the results. Regal had like 50 some new guys. So actually Regal really fucked Idaho State by completely turning over the roster and bailing. So the interesting thing is there any way Idaho State can't be a dumpster fire? No. Portland State, similar. Last year they had a ton of upperclassmen who were all gone and they sucked. Northern Arizona has been underachieving for a handful of years. The intriguing thing to me is whether Chris Ball is on the hot seat. They lost RJ Martinez and didn't have that much else. So yeah, Paul Wolf for sure, and Cal Poly. By the way, Andrew Townsend in the comment section saying things that don't make me nervous. Paul Wolf. Well, hey, I understand it, but I'm with you on essentially. I'm going to co-sign all you said and add. Cal Poly had more close games. Now they're against mostly shitty teams. Keep that in mind. But Cal Poly had more close games than you might guess last season. Like a 2-point loss at Northern Arizona, 9-point loss to Idaho State, and a 7-point loss to Eastern. Yeah, they got there, and a 7-point win to close season against Portland State. But that's 3 close losses, and Spencer Brash, their quarterback, who won't be back. I mean, Cal Poly had the best passing offense in the Big Sky last season, but Brash threw a ton of picks, and Brash wouldn't have played if starting quarterback Jaden Jenkins hadn't gone down with his knee injury. He's recovered, plus Sam Heward is now in the mix, although I expect Sam Heward is probably going to be getting the nod or he doesn't come to Cal Poly. But if Cal Poly can pass like they did last year and turn it over just a few less times, that itself explains a couple extra wins. And like defensively, Cal Poly was atrocious last year. They had some issues with injury, and the problem for a team like Cal Poly last season was they just don't have the depth to handle any sort of injuries. Because look, there's no world where Cal Poly doesn't suck defensively last season, obviously, or this season now, but it'd be tough for them to get worse injury luck. So I'm with you. Cal Poly, easily the most intriguing of those teams, and the continuity of Paul Wolf, even though Bo Baldwin left, like you said, it's just going to be a slightly different version of what was happening anyway. So no real disruption other than probably the storyline of Bo Baldwin leaving for a little bit. So no, 100% agree. I think we're game to move on to the next tier. Unless people in the comment section wants to really hit the shitty teams.
I do want to mention one other thing about these shitty teams. NAU, if you have this weird hatred for Cal Poly and you're looking for what other awful team might take a step, look, I think the ball is going to drop at the end of the year. I think NAU is going to be bad. However, most of their offense comes back except for 3 offensive linemen and their quarterback. Obviously, RJ Martinez was quite good and moved on to much bigger and better things, but their expected new quarterback is Daniel Britt. And he's, for those who don't know, he played at Montana, was the backup there for the last couple of years. And most of the guys in the Griz fans that we know were pretty upset that he left. They thought he maybe should have had a little bit more of a fair shot over the last few years, when obviously Lucas Johnson looked pretty good at times last year. But that's, if you're looking for another bad team that might be able to take a step towards mediocrity, NAU. But other than that, Portland State's going to be bad. Idaho State's going to be bad.
I want to push back on the Daniel Britt thing just a second, because I think it'll actually be pushback you enjoy. Daniel Britt received attention from Montana fans at the end of the season, because Montana fans were essentially saying, hey, the season's over. Why don't we give Britt a shot? And people were upset about how not giving the dude a shot. When Britt played, he was not a great passing quarterback. He's a mobile quarterback. So, if NAU lost starters on the O-line, they weren't that great a rushing team anyway last season. I guess I'd say the evidence we have right now is if Daniel Britt is your answer, then you belong in the category of cannot beat Idaho in the Big Sky, which is the bottom 4 teams. So, I guess to spend one more second on NAU. look, they're turning into, you said this in our outline already and no one else can see this. They are turning into Portland's Kevin Marshall in the comment section. Britt was horrible. Those Griz fans are dumb. Thank you. Part of it was Griz fans hoping for just anything and pretending the season was written off when, hey, the Griz did win a playoff game going with what Houck wanted to do. So whatever. NAU is kind of becoming Portland State now for me, of what, like 3 years when Chris Ball came, seemed like there was some energy. Honestly, feel like it may have been just a poor choice to move on from Jerome Sowers when they hired Chris Ball, because Sowers was up and down, but that's what NAU's been forever. With Ball, NAU's just been down. They've been underwhelming to me watching, and they do not, talent-wise, when I watch NAU, they don't really pop against anyone. That counts the shittier teams in the conference. So I guess that's the other storyline of those bottom teams, is how much longer can we ride until we completely write off NAU as the next Portland State? I'm ready to say it now. And we've now spent roughly 10 minutes on the bottom four, so I'm ready to let you take the next category of teams that Idaho should beat, but on a bad day, Idaho could lose.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to rank them from these four that I'm going to list out. I think that the first one I name is the worst. The last one I name is the best. So I would go with Northern Colorado, Eastern Washington, UC Davis, and then Sac State. So of those four, Brian, I think we've got a handful of intriguing storylines for all of them. I'll let you take the wheel and pick which team we're going to talk about first.
Everyone loves when we bring up Northern Colorado. So to me, I'm going to start in Greeley, and the storyline out of Greeley was first, like, there's not a ton of news out of the spring other than Northern Colorado has a competent coach, which is the story, is with the talent Northern Colorado retains and brings in, now that they have the McCaffrey dumpster fire out of Greeley, the long grass is safe from burning. We get to see how much the McCaffrey family truly weighed down Northern Colorado. They turned that program into a joke. Ed Lamb is a verified good Big Sky coach, won a Big Sky championship, or I think 2 Big Sky championships at Southern Utah, which was another one of the directional schools that was never high profile in the Big Sky. There's some returning talent. Jacob Sermon is going to be the starting quarterback. He's the dude who should have started last year, clearly had more arm and leg talent than Dylan McCaffrey, but he had the wrong last name. Well, the dude gets a shot right this season. David Hoge, he's edge rusher who 2 years ago was second team all Big Sky. Then he was out essentially all of last year with injury. He's back. So look, there is some talent returning. You'll hit on some of the departures, I'm sure, which are a problem. But I find Northern Colorado interesting because last year they were just a joke. And now with a guy who, look, if we went back 2 years ago, let's say Jason Eck never applied to Idaho. If Idaho had hired Ed Lamb, I would have been happy with that hire at Idaho. And now, I was floored that a guy as good as Ed Lamb would go back to Northern Colorado. But hey, some people just want to be head coaches, and that's what he did. So that to me is what's most interesting, really from the Idaho's perspective too, is that I think a team that sucked last year, like Northern Colorado, potentially being solid, adds depth to the bottom of the conference, where it makes it a little bit harder to just pencil through your schedule and say, hey, that's a W, because now this is at least a team that's not going to beat itself because coaching staff doesn't know what the hell they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Brian, with that. I think the most interesting thing about Northern Colorado is you can look at the guys they lost. Elijah Dotson was one of the best running backs in this conference for what felt like 10 years. They lost their 2 top receivers. They lost 3 guys that started on the offensive line. They lost a handful of defensive starters. But how much of this team is going to turn over just from what's there, and how much better are they going to be as a result of that? I mean, a year and a half ago, we didn't expect Giovanni McCoy to end up being the Jerry Rice Award winner. He came in and was the lowest quarterback in the room when Eck took over, and then obviously had a hell of a season, changed things completely. Jacob Sermon is probably going to be the guy. I'm not saying that their 4th string quarterback is going to end up being a Jerry Rice Award winner, but what I would expect is every single kid on that roster is going to get a fair shot. And I don't think that was the case when Ed McCaffrey was around. So that's intriguing to me. Maybe there's more talent here. Maybe the guy was just a terrible coach. I mean, just like you see Paul Petrino finally leave Moscow, new guy comes in, mostly the same players, and immediately make the playoffs. I'm not saying Northern Colorado is going to do that, but I do see that they could make that kind of jump to being, oh, they're not this awful dumpster fire with coaches snapping clipboards and throwing them at people. Like, I don't think that's going to happen again under Ed Lamb. So it'll be nice to see that program at least not be in the news for being just a complete tire fire. Anything else about Northern Colorado before we move on to another team I'm very interested in, Brian?
No, I think we're good talking about Northern Colorado. We may have, look, Tubbs has some loyal and just kick-ass listeners, but we can only ask so much of our listeners any given episode. So I pulled Northern Colorado as the interesting team to look at. Who are you looking at?
I am looking at Eastern Washington. I think that this is maybe the biggest story in the conference at the moment. Is Eastern going to turn it around and go back to being the Eastern that has been Eastern for almost 20 years? Is Aaron Best on the hot seat? Like, what? I don't know what's going to happen with them. Last year, their defense was atrocious. Their offense was not the offense of old. Gunnar Talkington was very much a game manager quarterback, which is totally fine. It's completely acceptable. He had some great numbers. He ran the offense well, but that's not how Eastern has ever really won ball games in the last 20 years. They've had guys that are Jerry Rice Award winners or on that level scoring 50 points a game while the defense is lucky to put up 45. They lost, obviously, Talkington. Freddie Roberson, one of the top receivers last year, is now in the SEC. They lost offensive lineman Wyatt Musser, one of the best guys in the Big Sky. They've turned over a bunch of their defense. I am most interested in seeing, with a new quarterback, are they going to make the strides to being the Eastern we remember, or are they going to settle into mediocrity? Because when you look at Cheney, no offense to Vandal fan Patrick here, but Cheney's a shithole. Their field is, it's the red turf, it's cool, whatever, but the stadium's not particularly impressive. Their practice facilities are basically non-existent. There's really not a whole lot of things that are going on in Cheney. So when you look at just how NIL is changing the landscape of college, and it's not so much in the FCS, but when you're talking about like Idaho, Montana State, and Eastern, if Eastern isn't continuously just always being a good program, what is there to convince a kid to go to Eastern over one of the Montanas or Idaho or somewhere, even honestly, even a Portland State? Like, if you want to play at a shitty stadium and have pretty lackluster fan support, you could go to Portland State, and then you're at least in Portland. It's better than Cheney. So that to me is the most exciting thing, Brian, in this, of all the stories. Is Aaron Best the guy who's going to put this program back? I mean, he's the number 2 coach by winning percentage in Eastern history. But is he going to put this school back to being, a 9-10 win program, or are they going to settle into this kind of mediocre? They can punch with just about anybody, but realistically, they're not going to win a lot of games.
Before I respond, it's very important to me that you look at the screen, look at the comment and the icon with the comment.
First off, Brian, fuck you. Second, Jason, fuck you. Third, the comment says, our intrepid Eastern reporter Patrick says the defense is worse than last year. So that's not a great sign. That means you're hanging on, hoping for Jared Taylor, the new transfer from a junior college, or Kikoa Vesperis to end up being a Walter Payton, Jerry Rice, win some sort of major award. It's probably not a good sign if the defense is somehow worse than last year, Brian.
Yeah, so Kevin Marshall in the comment section saying Eastern must return to top 3 of the Big Sky and make the playoffs, or they blow the whole thing up. One thing I'm going to bring up related to Aaron Best on the hot seat, because I believe he absolutely is on the hot seat. Eastern's athletic department finally hired fundraisers. So Eastern's fundraising relative to the last 5 years is off the charts. So if you believe Eastern could not afford to fire Aaron Best, you were right last year. You are not right this year. I am with you on, and look, another Aaron Best caveat, Dallas. You said he's their second winningest coach in program history, with the asterisk that the dude picked up from where Bo Baldwin left off. And Eastern has been on a look. They made the championship in 2018. By the way, Baldwin's players were what got him there, and it's been a little bit a steady downward trajectory since that 2018 national runner-up finish. And look, Eastern against the Idaho last year, they just didn't look like they had the talent that look, even 2 years ago or last couple years and it wasn't just Eric Barrier. Eric Barrier absolutely mattered. But when Eastern was having their slightly underwhelming seasons of making the playoffs, but not a championship contender, they outclassed the bottom 2/3 of the conference, just beat the shit out of all the okay to bad teams. But like they just weren't good enough to beat some of the better teams. They weren't physical enough. Defensively, this was easily the second worst defensive team in the league, only because Cal Poly was such an abomination. We already talked about that. I'm not even sure I would rank if we had to put pen to paper right now. I don't know if I'd put Eastern above Northern Colorado. They've moved into, hey, you got to prove it now, guys, territory with how underwhelming Eastern was last season. And to me, that is sad. Like, I don't say it as a joke. I like Eastern Washington. When Idaho's not playing, I watch Eastern games. I think they're one of the more fun fan bases in the Big Sky, outside of Montana State. They're the kind of team that I think it's good for the Big Sky to be good. But you already talked about it. They lost some skill position players. They were catastrophically terrible defensively. So you might say any losses they had, it's not like they're going to bring in worse guys than the team had last season. But I think Aaron Best has slowly been losing the faith of the fan base for a while. And we're not going to do schedule breakdowns, but Eastern has a second consecutive year with a challenging schedule. So if Eastern's going to break out of this, we have them essentially slotted in the bottom half of the conference, just barely in the bottom half. If they're going to break out of that, it's because they're a good team, Dallas. Anything else you want to touch on Eastern side just for a couple minutes? There's one more team in this category I want to spend a minute on.
I know which team it is. I know that you have a deep love for Dan Hawkins, so fire away, Brian.
Well, it's actually not UC Davis, because I think UC Davis is easily the best team out of this group and the most stable. It's Sacramento State, which Sacramento State, look, we all know, hey, Andy Thompson, defensive coordinator, is now head coach. Troy Taylor left Sacramento State after like three consecutive Big Sky championships. Sacramento State goes 8-0 in Big Sky last season. Troy Taylor's now at Stanford, but this team, between transfers and graduation, was just decimated talent-wise. Never mind that Troy Taylor was the most inventive offensive mind in the conference. So that's gone. So God knows what's going to happen with their play calling or how they're supposed to look like the team they had last season. Because look, Troy Taylor was, in my mind, the best coach and the best offensive coach in the Big Sky. Look, I love Jason Eck, but Troy Taylor won the conference 3 years in a row. That's something just about no one can do. But their quarterback duo of O'Hara and Jake Dunaway gone. Cameron Scadaboo transferred to Arizona State to hang out with Bo Baldwin. Pierre Williams, a he was an all Big Sky level receiver, gone. Marte Mapu, Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year, was drafted, so he's gone. The real question is whether Carson Camp, quarterback transfer from South Dakota, roster wise, I've seen some FCS preseason stuff projecting him as a top 10 quarterback. Okay. If that's true, then some of our offensive stuff is answered. But honestly, looking at how this team, look, I'm stealing all your research, Dallas. This team lost virtually everyone except Marshall Martin, their tight end / wide receiver, who's very good. He's going to be preseason all Big Sky, but they lost one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in the league. They lost a ton of all Big Sky talents. And now Andy Thompson, it's his first year. We don't know if he's going to do that 50-50 split like Troy Taylor did. If he doesn't, we don't know to what extent he might have a stranglehold on play calling or not. Like, hey, is he going to do a Jay Hill thing where the offense can't be that interesting? Or is he going to let go and say, look, if the team's going to be good, they have to look something like they did the last couple of years? I don't know. All that's intriguing for me. There's virtually no reporting out of Sacramento, Dallas. So honestly, we have no idea. Sacramento State, to me, easily, they could, best case scenario, be a top 4 team. They could also find themselves in the bottom 5.
Yeah, they're very interesting to me. And I guess for me, I would bet on the depth. That was a very good football team the last 3 years. Obviously, the names, I mean, Scadaboo was incredible. Pierre Williams was great. Marte Mapu was one of the best defenders that's been through the Big Sky in a very long time. There was a lot of talent they've lost, but they are bringing back most of the rest of their roster. And then again, they have Carson Camp from South Dakota, who I think was the MVFC Freshman of the Year his freshman year. Pretty damn good quarterback. They brought in a JC running back, so they're obviously just trying to fill those holes very quickly at quarterback and running back. They kept most of the staff intact. Troy Taylor didn't bring a lot of guys with him to Stanford. I call him Bobby Freaks. I don't know how his last name is pronounced. Google it. I'm not even going to try to spell it. Bobby Freaks, their quarterbacks coach, is now their offensive coordinator. They did a very good job of just keeping what they had. For now, this early in the game where there's no reporting out of Sac State, I think this team is still going to be pretty good. I think this team is going to be one of those fringe playoff contenders right there with UC Davis. I mean, which is perfect with that rivalry. I think they're going to be battling for that 5th spot in the conference, but I think there's a very clear line between the top 4 teams in this conference and then Sac State and UC Davis being right below them. Now, 3 months from now, we could find out that Sac State is going to be complete shit, or we could find out, hey, that defense is still incredible, and this is still a team that might be able to win this conference. But right now, this feels like the right spot for me. I would take them over UC Davis at the moment, but I also have such a hatred for Dan Hawkins that I don't know if I'm ever going to pick them in a true situation over anybody, just based on sheer hatred and bias.
So want to add this Carson Camp, and hey, thanks Kevin in the comment section for saying Camp can spin it. Last year, Carson Camp did not start the entire season through 4 touchdowns, 5 picks. In 2021, the dude started essentially the entire season, 65% completion percentage, 2,200 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, 7 picks, 149 rating. So the guy has had at least one good season. So Kevin, thanks for that. Thanks for the tip to look it up. I mean, you hit on the more optimistic interpretation, Dallas. I don't necessarily disagree, and you're right. With a guy like with a guy like Troy Taylor the last few years, and a guy like Andy Thompson, they're stable as well. They didn't see an ocean of transfers leaving. They did lose some dudes that matter, but the program wasn't. I mean, it's not like when Danny Sprinkle left Montana State. I know we're crossing streams of sports, but Danny Sprinkle took the entire Montana State roster plus recruits with him to Utah State. Well, that's not what happened when Troy Taylor left. So you're right. There's reason to believe there's depth there.
Brian, you missed the very obvious. Zach Kloss took most of the roster with him when he left too. You should have gone with that. That was way more accurate.
Well, and you bring that up because Kloss coached at Sacramento State too. So it always comes back to veggies here, Dallas. Thank you. Again, we can only ask so much of our listeners. So, okay, we've hit those teams. Do you want to talk about Davis much?
I mean, Cody Hawkins left. That's really the only thing I care about there. There's not a whole lot I want to hit on. They lost a bunch of guys. They didn't bring anybody noteworthy in the transfer portal. But that program has been so stable for so long that, I mean, Dan Hawkins' worst years there are around 500. So even if they have a down year, they're going to be around 500, which, based off of what the Big Sky has looked like, even a down year for them, they're probably slotting in somewhere around that 6th, 7th team on the fringe of trying to compete for the playoff spot if a coin flip went their way once or twice. So,
yeah,
I'm pretty good with that.
Just to hit what they lost, and Dallas did a shit ton of research, guys. I'm completely stealing this all from Dallas. They lost 3 linemen, and then Alonzo Gilliam was, in my mind, the second best running back in the Big Sky last season. He's finally graduated, and tight end McAllen Castles, he was one of the better tight ends in the league.
Transferred to Tennessee. He's big. I mean, he went big time. Big time.
I think UC Davis is the easiest team out of this to project as sneaking into the top 4 of the conference. But without further ado, how about since we have some time, we can talk about the individual top 4 teams. But
Brian, we have something we have to get to first. Because what show is complete without telling you guys a little bit about Hughes River Expeditions? Hughes River, oh boy. I started reading off of the wrong line. We are really amateur hour here without Martin. For anybody that can't see the screen, Martin is just our background. Martin's not here. It is just a fucking tire fire over here. It's real bad. Let's start that over, Colin. I'm going to pretend that last 30 seconds just didn't happen, and we just crushed this ad read for you. That's what actually happened.
We could also just talk about the ad read longer before doing it.
I mean, I just figured it was more free ad space for Colin. He's such a good sugar daddy for us. Anyways.
2 live viewers down.
Yep, that's my fault. If you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You can even check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire United States. Just bring your clothes and let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Again, call them now, 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com.
All right, so I'm gonna draft the number 4 team, Dallas. And listeners, we're gonna spend the majority of the rest of our time talking about the individual top 4 teams. And you will notice top 5 doesn't have Portland State, so life sucks. And we have not yet talked about Idaho, and we will. So number 4, and one more pretext, we can take a little bit longer before talking about a team. So we said the first grouping was teams that can't beat Idaho. Second grouping was teams that Idaho should beat, but hey, on a shitty day, anything happens. We're now entering the group of teams where no matter who's playing who, you have to play well to win. Or for the Idaho-centric version, hey, if Idaho is going to take that next step, these are the teams Idaho has to be able to beat more so than last season. And number 4 for me is Weber State. Weber State has, of course, new head coach. Jay Hill left to become defensive coordinator at BYU. Didn't have a ton of dudes leave with him, so there's some stability there. I always get this name wrong. It's Mickey Mental, correct, Dallas? Okay, offensive coordinator Mickey Mental. He was there for 1 year. He's promoted to head coach. So you expect some identity is going to be, like, other than that change, Weber State kept essentially all their coaches. So there's going to be some change in that the team's no longer run by a defensive-minded guy. But also a lot of the other guys who've been at Weber for a while are still there. So the culture's probably still pretty stable, but the offense is going to look different. Observations I got out of spring ball scrimmages from Dustin Chapman from Weber State Weekly. Thank you for the assist. Mickey Mental offensively now, the team looks a little smoother in their second year. Weber State was better offensively last season than they'd been, historically. Weber State didn't, beat the shit out of the conference or anything. They had the number 9 total offense in the Big Sky. Scoring wise, they're number 5 scoring offense. So, okay. It wasn't Montana level. This season, it looks like they're going to run a lot more RPO, which was certainly not what the team did last season with Mental and not what they'd done previously under Jay Hill. So a little bit different offensive identity, which is a surprise because a question for Weber State is, do they have the skill position players in the quarterback to run RPO effectively against good teams? The safety for Weber, though, is defensively, they look pretty stable. You might lose a little bit of quality just because your defensive play caller is not Jay Hill, and Jay Hill was elite as a defensive play caller. But the team still looks strong in the secondary. They still look strong up front. This is a team that defensively, they're not going to beat themselves. They're probably going to lose a few points special teams wise because also Jay Hill was the best special teams coach in the conference, at least at the head coaching level. But I think Weber State, even though they have a new head coach, they're not like Sacramento State where they had a ton of people leave. They don't know right now. Kyle Weiser looks like he's going to be the quarterback. He didn't look that great, but there's still time for someone else to transfer in. If he's their starting quarterback, to me, he is the top of the bottom half quarterbacks in the league. It's like he doesn't suck, but I wouldn't want him as Idaho's starting quarterback. But there's enough stability at Weber State that I'm not concerned about them, the bottom falling out the way, if worst case scenario happens with Sac State, Dallas, that can happen. That's not going to happen for Weber State. But I don't think they have the offensive talent to get much higher than number 4 in the conference in my book.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Bronson Barron's no longer there. We're talking question mark at quarterback. Josh Davis and Dante McMillan. Josh Davis didn't play as much last year from some injury stuff, but Josh Davis was a very good running back here for a long time. Dante McMillan was their top rusher. They lost 2 of their 3 top pass catchers. They lost multiple offensive linemen. We're talking now at the point of we're relying on Weber to continue being good just because they've been so good for so long. Again, Jay Hill's gone, but defensive coordinators Grant Duff and Joe Dale are still there. Like you said, they didn't call plays, but they're still there. Most of the coaching staff is still there. And as Captain 58 reminds everyone in the chat, Longstapper might lose Weber a game or two. People forget this team won a bunch of games last year. They went 10-3. They lost by 3 points to Sac State. They lost to Montana State in the playoffs. And then they lost to Montana State on the road when their snapper had 4 safeties in one game. They lost that game by 5. So you do the math there just on the safeties alone, much less the free possessions being given back to Montana State. So this was a very good team last year that's kept most of their coaching tree intact. Obviously, the head is gone, but just about everybody else stayed. There's a couple new net position coaches just with Mental taking over as the head coach and offensive coordinator. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he handles that. But if any team was prepared to lose their head coach, I think Weber State was the team most prepared for it. I fully agree with just about everything you said, Brian. I think they'll probably figure the offense out. Mickey Mental, his background is that he's very good at what he does. Feels like even if Weissner's not great, or again, if it's spring transfer TBD, feels like their defense has been so sound for so many years. One year without Jay Hill, it's probably not going to crater. Even if it takes a step back, they're still a top, probably 3rd defense in the conference. I fully expect Weber to be a playoff team this year.
The only thing I want to add to that, Dallas, is maybe I should adjust this. Weber State, I think, could finish 3 or 4. I don't think they can win the conference. And to be very narrow, I think Weber's probably going to look a little better offensively, a little bit more creative offensively this year. Mm-hmm. And that'll probably make up for any sort of loss on the defensive side of the ball, or any sort of creativity or schematic deficits they have this season that just weren't on the table the last few years. I guess the special teams is the bigger deal to me, which I know like Captain 58 hit the joke Weber State had of they just had long snapper issues, and that cost them at least 1 game. But if we put that aside, Weber State has reliably been able to put points on the board from special teams, including touchdowns, the last couple seasons. To me, that's probably the area they take the biggest step back. And, Kevin Marshall, the comment section, Weber's intriguing. They will have to score more to win. So good point, Brian. I mean, that's it. I think if they're going to be in the top 3 with a chance to step up, they're just going to have to look offensively at least 1 step better than they have the last couple seasons. They're going to have to look a little bit more creative. And they are one of the teams who their quarterback answer is underwhelming. If Idaho did not have Giovanni McCoy, and I was told, hey, you can take a transfer from some other FCS school or Kyle Weisser from Weber State, who would you take? I'd roll the dice on someone who's not Kyle Weisser, because Weisser just did not look particularly good when he did get to play for Weber. But I mean, I don't know what else there is to add now, because you're correct. They have stability. They were one of the teams who could best handle losing a coach. But I think there's a reason why. I'm glad you hit on the close games Weber had, because maybe I just misremember Weber State a little bit, because I just don't have faith in teams that they were okay offensively last season, but they also, part of what they did is they accrued a lot of offense against shitty teams and against better teams, minus the Montana State game. They were fine offensively in the Montana State game. They lost because of the snaps.
Well, but even then, they scored multiple touchdowns off of returns. They only scored 3 offensive touchdowns in that game.
Okay, there you go. Okay, then I shouldn't have added that, but that asterisk of they looked fine against the shitty to okay teams. They were not as good offensively against the better teams, which, hey, like lots of teams look like that. The good teams are the good teams for a reason. But that's why I'm not ready to put Weber State above number 4. Dallas, who do you have at number 3?
Also, Brian, I like how you set this whole thing up just for me to be the one with the egg on my face, because we both know who number 1 is. There's no question about who the number 1 team is. If anybody else is going to tell you there's a different number 1 team than the team that we're going to get to, they're just being biased. If you take bias out of it, number one, no question, which leaves us teams 2 and 3, Idaho or Montana. And you're going to make me be the bad guy here. I've got to pick Idaho at number 3. I would love to have taken Montana at number 3, but I can't do it. And we'll get into the reasons why. But I got to go with number 3 being Idaho, Brian. I just don't think Idaho is there yet with the development of the trenches. I think that's so, it's obviously important at every level. Like, you have to have an offensive line that can block, but at this level specifically, it is so vital to have bigger and stronger guys than the other side of the ball. And I don't think Idaho is quite there yet to be the bully of the Big Sky. I think they're going to be able to beat, again, the 8 teams that we listed off in the, hey, you could beat us on a bad day, or the 4, well, if Idaho loses to one of those, the season's over. Idaho should run through most of those teams pretty easily. It's this top group that's pretty tough. I've got to put Idaho at 3. I think Giovanni McCoy takes another step forward. I think the offense looks better. I think the defense is also going to be a little bit better, just having more guys in another year of Orch's system. I think that we haven't obviously gotten too much into it, but some of the freelancing problems last year I think are going to be better this year. Even with guys like Paul Moala and Kamari Bailey leaving, I think the defense is going to sort itself out. Right now, Brian, I've got to take Idaho at number 3, though. I just don't think there's enough depth and size in the lines to get it done over the course of a full season, to the point that we're talking about Idaho winning 10 games and being a seed in the FCS playoffs. I just don't think that year 2 of the Eck era is there yet.
I'm glad.
Nick Weber, one last thing, Nick Weber jumping into the comments with reverse jinx, ! He may or may not have seen through that.
I'm glad that you got to pick Idaho, because I would have picked Idaho at 3 as well. So look, the basic story for Idaho is, I think that, look, I'm going to hit Sean's comment, because Sean essentially hits where I think people should be. This is not meant to put down to Idaho. Hell, top 3 in a very good conference is a great place to be preseason in year 2. But Sean Kramer, you tell me Eck year 2, we're top 3. I'll take that. That means we're at the very least in the conversation to compete for a title. Yes. So things going for Idaho is, I think Idaho is easily coasting into the position similar to how Eastern was in the last couple, before last season, the previous years, where Idaho talent-wise is just going to outclass the bottom and the middle of the Big Sky. And so I think Idaho's going to have some bloodbath games, just like Idaho had last season. You talk about Northern Colorado homecoming, Portland State at home as well, where even when the first half was a little iffy, Idaho just beat the shit out of them. I think that's how Idaho's going to be with teams 12 through 6 in this conference, which, of course, hey, guys, Idaho's not in the rest. So then there's 5 teams that I think the game's more likely to be competitive. I think Idaho's going to take another step offensively. I'm not concerned about that part whatsoever. I think defensively, like I said, Idaho's going to be fine. There is question. Now, Idaho kicked ass at forcing turnovers last year, and just in terms of luck, I'm not saying Idaho's forced turnovers were luck, but in the basic luck of season-to-season progression, it's very hard to be one of the top teams in the nation, or top 2 teams in the Big Sky, in forced turnovers every single year. And hey, Paul Moala picked off 4 of those passes. That's pretty damn good at the outside linebacker spot to have 4 picks. So just in turnover numbers, having a guy who can defend the pass that well in the middle, that I don't think Idaho has the answer there yet, which doesn't mean it's going to be a problem. Defensive play calling is just going to be different. But I think you're right in that. Look, if Idaho's good, I'm going to not intimate this. Montana State is obviously the number 1 pick. Montana State, if Idaho's going to be able to beat teams like Montana State, they're going to have to prove they have the size up front, both defensively and offensively. If Idaho's going to, we saw this in the Southeastern Louisiana game. Idaho defensively kind of wore out against a very good offensive team in Southeast Louisiana. But that game didn't, from the defensive perspective, that didn't look that different from what Idaho looked like against Sacramento State and UC Davis to close, towards the end of the season. So if Idaho has the size, That's how they make that step beyond number 3. I just don't think they have the talent to really be worse than 3 or 4 in the conference, because we know coaching wise, this isn't a team where you're concerned about the play callers on either side of the ball. Idaho answered those questions last year easily. The question to me from the Idaho perspective is, has Eck had enough time to develop the size that FCS programs can't just have the dudes transfer in? And I'd say year 2, it's a little bit early to project Idaho to make that the type of growth where if you're finishing number 3 or higher in the Big Sky, you're beating multiple playoff teams. That's the step that Idaho needs to take, but it's also the step Idaho didn't really make last season. So upfront is going to more or less be where the answer comes, Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, I think the subtext here for anybody that's not reading into it is that we fully anticipate that year 3, 4, and 5, this is probably a different conversation. But like you said, you can't teach the size. You can't just magically have this incredible class of transfers come in and now you've got 10 deep offensive line guys that you trust because they're bigger and stronger than everybody else. It takes so long to build that. That's why it makes sense to me that Idaho's 3. But like Sean Kramer said, being top 3, or, as again, we're 2 idiots projecting this months in advance, thinking Idaho's a top 3 team in the Big Sky in the second year of a new head coach when we just watched Paul Petrino piss away 4 good years. I really can't be upset with that. Like it might sound doom and gloom. Like, oh, Idaho doesn't have enough offensive line help. We're still talking about this team beating multiple playoff teams, or hopefully beating multiple playoff teams. And the schedule is stronger, or much stronger this year, but we're still talking about Idaho probably being a playoff team. Like these are good problems to have. Anything else about Idaho, Brian, before we jump into number 2?
No, just want to agree with what you said, which is, look, Idaho projected as a top 3 team. That's if you're upset with that, that's a kick-ass place for your program to be. Top 3 in the Big Sky means you're probably a top 15, top 12 team in the nation. So Dallas and I just de facto picked Idaho to be at least top 15 in the nation this season. So look, we already said Montana State was the number 1 team because they should be. So I want to go over Montana and look at Colby Peterson in the comments section, one of the Weber State Weekly dudes that we rely on. And by the way, Colby Peterson, courtesy of Colby, some Tubbs patrons, patreon.com/Tubbs the club. Sometime over the summer, they're going to get some kick-ass stuff mailed to them. And it's because of Colby Peterson. So Colby says didn't run the ball particularly well or protect their QB. Unless they take a step forward as a unit, no reason to believe they produce a different result. Here's Colby why I had Montana at number 2. Bobby Houck did not exactly fire his assistant coaches, but he kind of did. What Montana did largely to address their offensive issues, although they had defensive coaching turnover as well, is Tim Rosenbach was essentially told, hey, you're going to be fired or demoted, but we'll give you time to try to find a job. Tim Rosenbach, the guy who called plays for Montana last year, he's been demoted from offensive coordinator to offensive analyst, and promoted in his place is former guy we talked about on this show a long time ago, Brent Peace, who was the wide receivers and assistant head coach for Montana State. He's now the offensive coordinator. And the returns out of spring ball for what Brent Peace at least the play calling he is willing to do in the spring, was the team looked like a much better version of last season. Bobby Houck is still going to make his teams run a decent amount, but Brent Peace is probably not going to do what Rosenbach did, which is, look, Montana did a shitty job of getting the ball to their best playmakers. No one has any idea why, but like Junior Bergen should have been towards the top of the Big Sky in receptions. That was absolutely not the case. Malik Flowers is gone, but he was an electric kick returner. They should have found ways to get him the ball in space on the offensive side as well, other than on kicks. And virtually no one kicked it to Flowers anyway. They also have Sam Vidlak, transfer quarterback from Boise State, he's working his way down the college ranks, started at Oregon State, then transferred to Boise State, now transferred to Montana. But the spring game returns are Vidlak's got an arm, and at this level, he's easily going to be a good enough talent at quarterback to expect they should be better passing overall. That doesn't answer the question of how Montana improves their O-line. But at the very least, look, Montana was a shockingly shitty offensive team last year. Look, total offense, Montana's number 10 in the conference. Scoring offense, Montana is they're number 6, but they also got some special teams points out of Malik Flowers. So it's a bottom 3-ish offense last season. I expect offensively they're going to definitely take a step up, and I think Vidlak as a passer is going to be a step up. Defensively, Montana has been fine with replacing all Big Sky level talented players for the last 3 or 4 years. So that very good Montana defense is going to still be back. Bobby Hauck teams will virtually never suck on the defensive side of the ball. They'll be in some ways better in the secondary because Robbie Hauck won't be there to get his ass kicked by Hayden Hatton and virtually every good receiver in the Big Sky that they line up against him. So I expect Montana defensively to be about where they were, Dallas, but I just don't think it's possible for them not to take a step forward offensively. And keep in mind, Idaho dudes, though Montana had a disappointing season by their fan base standards, they made the playoffs, hosted a playoff game, and won a playoff game. If that's a shitty season, that's a good place to be.
I mean, I would love to be I would love to just be dumping on this as, hey, they're shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're reassigning all their coaches, which means they have no idea what they're doing. They lost a bunch of really talented guys on both sides of the ball. As Colby Peterson said, their offensive line was not particularly good last year. It was fine, but they didn't really do a great job of blocking for Lucas Johnson, hence why he got hurt. They didn't really run the ball particularly well. They were just, again, very good defensively, and they were able to get it done offensively when it mattered. But I do think they're bringing back all 6 offensive line starters. They had 2 guys that split time at left guard. Both of them are back, as well as the starters at the other 4 positions. I would expect to see them take a leap forward because that's typically what happens when you bring back an entire unit in college football. Usually they all improve together because it's just another year of them all working together. Like you talked about the addition by subtraction of Robbie Hauck leaving. Like, this is a lot of projection in the fact that Bobby Hauck's teams in Montana have just historically been pretty damn good. I would love for this to just be shuffling the chairs on the Titanic and just watch the ship sink. We've talked about it on this show before. I think Brent Pease is a pretty bad coach. You watch his trajectory and he has just fallen further and further and further throughout his career. I would love to see him just completely bomb as the OC QB's coach. I would love to see them go out there and have like Bart Holt is saying, they're desperately searching for a quarterback. I would love to see that. Would absolutely love for them to completely collapse. I just don't think it's going to happen. I also have to give a quick shout out. Former Vandal Mike Linehan, who is Matt's brother and Scott's son, is now the defensive line coach at University of Montana. So that kind of hurts a little bit to see a Vandal getting into that awful grizzly red color. But Brian, I just, at this point, knowing what we know about Montana, I would love to be wrong. But it just feels like they're going to figure it out. Again, like you said, a bad season for them. They won a home playoff game. Like I would do a lot of unspeakable things to win a home playoff game right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues last season, look, Jason Eck was clearly not taken seriously by Bobby Hauck last season. And look, Idaho won that game. That was a kick-ass game to be at. I was there. Yeah, Montana's not going to be sleeping on Jason Eck this time around. Montana, no matter what you want to say about Bobby Hauck, about how stubborn he is, which is an issue for Montana, him reshuffling coaching roles, it's pretty damn dramatic to take a guy from OC to offensive analyst. Their defensive coordinator retired, but they promoted internally. So I think they'll be fine with that. But that shift offensively, with how loyal Bobby Hauck is to his guys, that's a huge acknowledgement of Bobby Hauck that offensively Montana wasn't good enough last year. And with the dudes they had, if they didn't change something, they weren't going to be good enough. So in my mind, there's just even though you have long standing on this show, even back when we talked about Brent Pease as an Idaho candidate, you were not high on the Pease train. Keep in mind, his comparison is like the offensive coordinator version of Zach Kloss. So what, is Montana going to be worse by having a guy who has objectively had better seasons in the past than Rosenbaum? No, I mean, it's virtually impossible for them not to take a step forward. And if they take a step forward, well, they already won a playoff game. They already hosted a playoff game. So we're talking about a team that they have depth there because of the team's been stable forever. Even in the Bob Stitt era, they weren't bad. They just weren't good enough for Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Hauk's been there for, this is 4th or 5th year now. He's been Montana. This is 5th year. Came back in 2018. So he's been there long enough that the depth he wants to rebuild is there. So I just think the floor is pretty damn high for Montana, especially if they're better offensively. We're closing in on an hour, and I'm okay with us not talking Montana State that much because they're really good, and I just don't think they're that interesting because the question is, hey, they made a national semifinal.
Brian, there's two words. There's 2 words we have to say about Montana State. Ravi Alston. It's all that needs to be said. Ravi Alston is the only starter on their offense that is not returning this year.
Yeah, Isaiah Fonse transferred, but he was out the entirety of last season.
Came back for the playoffs.
And Montana State, they replaced running backs because they have, 1, they recruit talented dudes, but 2, Montana State is where Idaho wants to be. They have size up front, both sides of the ball that lets them dominate. So they could turn an okay 3rd string running back into a guy who looks all Big Sky level. They also have, both Tommy Mellott and Sean Chambers are back. I honestly think Sean Chambers is the better out of Tommy Mellott and out of those 2 quarterback options, where they're virtually the same dude. Both are okay passers, but very good runners. Good enough passers, but great rushers. They can be real creative. Brent Vegan's been creative. They can be real creative if both those guys are healthy, about having 2 guys who God knows who you're going to snap it to or put one of them in motion. They also are fine just running it down your throat and beating the shit out of you, because that absolutely worked for Montana State last year. Rushing wise, the Bobcats rushed for 31 touchdowns, 6.6 yards per rush in Big Sky play. And that was for a while, they truly did have their 3rd or 4th string running back. It just doesn't matter because they recruit guys who are good enough and their line is elite level. So that's why they're number 1. That's why it was a brain dead number 1 for Montana State. Anything you want to add?
I mean, Brian, it's unquestionable. This is the best team in the Big Sky. And I would love to make the argument that Idaho is better than this team. I can't. Even with bias, I can't. This team is incredible. Colby Peterson in the comment section mentioned a little while earlier, does any team on this side of the mountains have an offensive line like NDSU or SDSU? Montana State is the one team that's trying to get close, and that's honestly what does it. They can run the ball on just about anybody. There's again Colby Tommy Mellott torched Weber twice on the ground. They just didn't have an answer for him. And Weber State is one of the best defenses year in and year out in the Big Sky. Montana State is unquestionably the number 1 team, and they can survive injuries. Mellott goes down and Chambers just plays the whole time. Chambers goes down, Mellott plays the whole time. If they lose both guys, who knows? But maybe the 4th string running back goes in at quarterback and they just run the wishbone. I don't know.
They had 5 dudes last year in the top 14 in Big Sky play of yards per rush. 5. 2 were quarterbacks and then 3 running backs. And Isaiah Fonse was not one of them.
No. There's just so much talent there. Brian, I'm honestly more concerned. Are they going to have more coordinators with DUIs or more playoff wins this year?
Okay, maybe that's the only question, because both the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator have been busted for DUIs. Is there
fairly recently?
Yeah, is there some weird instability there that may matter? I think it's probably not going to matter. I just think, hey, maybe Doug Collins, NBA announcer, he sometimes talks about what, and he's cited Pat Riley as having said this, that what undoes teams that could be dynasties is the disease of more, which is to say guys becoming complacent with their roles, wanting more, wanting bigger roles, wanting bigger paychecks, losing focus on what got them there in the first place. Maybe that's a sign that the adults in the room in Montana State have to adjust to that disease of more, but the athlete's not concerned. Brent Vegan's done nothing but succeed at Montana State. He's continuing to recruit great dudes just like Jeff Choate did. Until proven otherwise, Montana State should be everyone's number 1. And with that said, Dallas, we're at an hour. We've hit all the teams. I'm ready to call it a night, unless you have anything else you want to hit on other than, hey guys, help support the show. Subscribe on YouTube. Once we get to 1,000 subscribers, YouTube has to pay us. So all of those things, that definitely helps. Like our videos, it helps us with algorithm shit. And if you want to support the show, if you want to get our inside tips that we don't try to break news, we share inside tips with patrons. Patreon.com/Tubs at the Club helps us keep the lights on. And it's, to me, like the best online discussion board that exists in our Discord.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. Again, patreon.com/Tubs at the Club, or just search #OnlyTubs. You'll probably find it eventually. We've stopped using that hashtag so much, but it's out there somewhere. Brian, all I have to say is I really missed Martin tonight. I really could have used him for some of the technical flubs that I've had. I lost my camera. I obviously botched the shit out of the Hughes River ad, which I usually is near and dear to my heart. I usually think I do a pretty mediocre job at it, but tonight was just bad. Hopefully Martin's back soon from whatever he's off to. And that's it. That's all I got, Brian.
Well, that said, we'll be back next week, likely talking about the basketball recruiting class. We have just a couple more episodes before Tubbs takes our June-July break. But see you next week. Kevin Marshall, comment section. Good show, gents. Thanks, Kevin. Check out Kevin, FCS Nation Radio. He's got one of the best, if not the best, nationwide FCS shows. You can check him out on terrestrial radio, but also just he's on Twitter and podcast. Otherwise, dudes, thanks for coming. We'll be back next week. V's up. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.